Hello, you're watching TVP World Talks. I'm Jonasz Lewiński. Beleaguered by Russian proxies and facing an uphill battle to win the September general elections, the pro-European forces in Moldova could be about to receive a powerful boost. The European Union is considering throwing the first negotiating cluster wide open for Chisinau, thus telling Moscow to stay clear. Yet the right signal to President Maya Sandu's supporters could also prove to be the wrong signal to Ukraine, which had so far walked hand in hand with Moldova on the path to EU membership. Joining us here today is Oana Popescu, director at the Global Focus Center. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Hi, welcome again for the invitation. Thank you for the invitation.
Glad to have you with us today. So the first question, do you think it is the right idea not to maintain this sort of lockstep approach to Ukraine and Moldova? Because these two countries had previously basically been walking together towards future EU membership. But now there are ideas which could actually dispense with this approach.
To be honest, I rather think it's a good idea to take steps forward. That's what it's all about, overcoming the blockade from Hungary, Russia's opposition. I think neither of the two countries, including Moldova, is happy to be separated at this point. It's been quite clear from the very beginning that the circumstances of Moldova and Ukraine are very different, and probably somewhere down the road their paths would have diverged because the internal conditions that they both have to deal with are very different. However, they're very closely interlocked by their security situation. What happens in Ukraine has a direct impact on Moldova. I think from the very beginning, Moldova and its authorities have acknowledged that they're benefiting from this opportunity thanks to Ukraine's bid to join the EU. So I think at this point, it's not really a decision that anybody is making with a light heart, not on the EU side, not even on the Moldovan side. And so either way, it's a difficult one. However, at this point, it might be the better decision of the two options, which are either move forward with one of the countries while giving the other one, giving Ukraine some credible, palpable benefits to secure its EU accession path as well, and to reassure it that it's not being sidelined, or because of opposition to Ukraine, not make any advance with either one of them, which would have sent, I think, a message that EU accession as a whole can be blocked for these countries. And that, I think, would have been even more unfortunate, given that already one of the three countries that initially applied, Georgia, is now on a completely different trajectory because of Russian influence.
Yes, Georgia is backsliding when it comes to the EU accession talks. But coming back to the question of Ukraine, how do you think Ukraine should be kept in the loop, so to say, if the synchronization between Moldova's and Ukraine's march to the EU is actually dispensed with? One article that was recently published mentioned, for example, some investment programs, the Erasmus student exchange. Well, that with all due respect, doesn't seem like something that would reassure Ukrainians that their path towards the EU is actually still a thing.
It's true, and like I said, you know, the circumstances at this point are not very favorable as a whole. I think, you know, in terms of what can be given to Ukraine, obviously the options on the table, as I hear as well, are accession to the Horizon funding program, to Erasmus Plus, and so on and so forth. But it's probably more credible and more tangible to de facto co-opt Ukraine into EU defense and defense industry building efforts. At this point, what Ukraine is consumed with is its war with Russia, and that's what is the main obstacle to its progress in every way. So in reality, to make Ukraine a part of all of these joint efforts, whether they are minilateral, so I don't know, something on the eastern flank between Romania and Poland as a joint security and defense initiative, which could include Ukraine, something wider that gets Ukraine into the EU funding schemes and gets it to benefit from that alongside EU member states, or just be a part of it through locating production facilities on its territory or carrying out joint exercises and genuinely being an integral part of European defense efforts. I think that is much more tangible, and it tends to make up for both the lack of NATO perspective and the possibility of EU accession. Obviously, none of this will be 100% credible, and it's not going to be the equivalent of opening the first cluster of negotiations. So at the same time, pressure on Viktor Orban should be maintained, and I think this is a task for the EU moving forward, to really find a solution to bypass the Hungarian opposition, because otherwise Viktor Orban will be able to hold hostage the fate of both Ukraine and Moldova as the EU accession process unfolds, as he has been able to do already with the Western Balkans, where Hungarian influence on the ground is working together with Russian influence to hold those countries away from their EU accession path.
And some have suggested that Donald Trump could actually exert an influence on Mr. Orban as a part of a broader peace deal concerning Ukraine. But let's move on now to Moldova. The main reason why the European Union is considering opening the first negotiating cluster is because of the elections. They want to boost pro-European forces in Moldova and, of course, keep the pro-Russian forces at bay. Do you think this is going to be sufficient to achieve this objective?
It's a huge effort. Moldova is up against a very powerful and resourceful enemy. Russia has thrown everything it has in this battle. It failed to overturn the result of presidential elections. It failed to overturn the result of the pro-EU referendum, although it has invested heavily into everything from disinformation to vote buying to fake parties and so on and so forth. What we're seeing this time ahead of the parliamentary elections is even more fierce. So it's a really unequal fight where I believe every form of international and especially European support can be instrumental in Moldova. Will it be enough? It's very hard to say. It depends how we define enough. I think there are slim chances at this point for Chisinau to maintain the same pro-European majority, which has allowed it a lot of room for maneuver in that sense. It will probably lose some of that. It will probably have to forge an alliance with other parties post-elections. The question is how big will the gap be between where the pro-European forces are now and where they will be after these elections? So if we can narrow that gap as much as possible, I think every effort is worth making.
You're saying that there is a slim chance of maintaining a stable pro-European majority. Does this mean that the Russian efforts trying to chip away at the support for the European Union are actually successful? Shouldn't the European Union engage more with Moldova by providing, for example, protection against election interference, against corruption, against the activities of foreign agents like the Ilan Shor party, which has been banned, and yet Mr. Shor continues to exert influence from abroad?
I think think that's already happening. There's a lot of cooperation with the European Union and with European Union member states. And Moldova is making a lot of efforts in that sense. We have seen only in recent times, we have seen various high-level arrests across Europe, all connected to the corrupt networks that have been influencing Moldovan politics for the past decades, in all honesty. So I think we're seeing a really strong push, which is obviously done in cooperation with partners, to try and keep these elections as safe as possible and as healthy as possible in the context of a massive Russian attack, interference attack on the electoral process. However, I think it's, like I said, the margin for maneuver that Russia has, unfortunately, is multiplied in Moldova by the presence of domestic agents. There are a lot of pro-Russian sympathizers in Moldova, which is not in itself necessarily a problem. Moldova has a complex identity, but a lot of these are working together with Russia to somehow prevent these elections from being free and fair. So will the European Union and Moldova working together be able to cancel all of these efforts? Probably not. These are the limits of what a democracy can do as compared to what a criminal state, which is both autocratic and willing to go to extreme lengths to impose its will on its neighbors, can. So it is, like I said, an uphill battle, but I'm quite optimistic that Moldova at this point is really an example for many European countries in terms of mechanisms to fight foreign interference and to reduce the margin of domestic agents. The only problem is that also the political parties in Moldova that are keeping it on a pro-European path have not always performed and optimally in terms of engaging with all the categories of the public. For instance, the Governing Action and Solidarity Party has limited influence in Transnistria, in Gagauzia. This comes for structural reasons, but it also comes as a consequence of not having made enough efforts to go out there, even in hostile territory, so to speak, and try to increase their influence. So it's a combination of factors, and it's very hard in times of war to expect stellar political performance while at the same time fighting a hybrid war against Russia. So under the circumstances, really, just as is the case with a potential separation from Ukraine in terms of continuing the EU accession, I think we are not in an optimal scenario, not in ideal circumstances, but doing or trying to make the best possible choices, working with the options that we have.
Oana Popescu was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And I'm Joanna Śrewiński. You're watching TVP World. Please stay with us.